Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your hosts of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we know what that sounds mean. Is we are off to the races. Another episode of the Conspiracy Farm. Jeffrey Wilson, always riding shotgun. My partner in crime, UFC Hall of Famer Pat Miletich. How are we doing today, champ?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you're keeping me busy, buddy. And I don't know how you did it, but you got one of our guests back. She's very sought after, obviously. So we're pretty damn lucky.
Very much so, very much so. And she was, very gracious with her time. Not too long ago, we got a lot of responses from her appearance, as her investigative work is absolutely groundbreaking, and it was, it's still reverberating. She's been very busy. Man, I mean, I don't know when she sleeps, because I'm seeing she's very busy, and she is definitely speaking truth to power, and I absolutely love it. She is an investigative reporter out of Bulgaria, ladies and gentlemen. Man, she's 8 hours ahead of us, champs? Again, so very gracious with her time. Dilyana Gaytandsheiva is joining us again today. How are you today, ma'am?
Thank you so much for having me again on your show. Yes, I was busy, but the reason that I didn't want to talk was that I first wanted to publish my investigation, and then when it has been published, now I can speak with facts, with documents, and it is not just an empty words. These are facts that are verifiable, provable, and now we can talk about them. My pleasure.
Yeah, and it's really heavy when we get into it. So, but I do want to summarize for people who didn't necessarily hear our last episode, or even if they did, we'll just kind of summarize where we kind of left off last time. I mean, your groundbreaking information on what you found, and I'll let you take us from here, what you found in Aleppo after ISIS kind of pulled back, in all that entailed, if you don't mind kind of summarizing what went down.
Yeah, sure. In December of 2016, I was covering the battle for Aleppo when the jihadists from al-Nusra Front, this is the Al-Qaeda affiliates in Syria, retreated from their positions in eastern Aleppo. I got inside 9 underground warehouses full of heavy weapons with Bulgaria as their country of origin. When I got back to my home country, I traced back these shipments, and it turned out that these Bulgarian weapons, these Bulgarian rockets, I'm talking about 122 millimeter Grad rockets. They were just a small portion of a bigger international scheme involving many countries, and later on, I received secret memos from the Azeri embassy to Bulgaria, and they included the full documentation of weapons exports to the U.S. Special Operations Command and Saudi Arabia on diplomatic flights, and these weapons ended up in the hands of terrorists in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Congo, Afghanistan. I can continue.
All the hot spots, yeah.
Yeah, this is.
And what were all the countries and intelligence agencies involved in all of these on the documentation that you found?
Yes, according to these documents that were leaked to me, the end user of these Eastern European weapons was the U.S. Special Operations Command. The U.S. Special Operations Command, or the Pentagon, awarded private American companies to purchase Eastern European weapons for their special military operations abroad, in Syria and in Iraq.
One of those companies is Purple Shovels. It was given a $50 million no-bid contract to basically train and arm.
I want to explain first in the end-user certificate that was inserted and that was attached to the diplomatic notes. The information as to who was the end user of these weapons was omitted. It wasn't indicated who the end user would be, which is a gross violation not only of the Bulgarian law, but of all international conventions to which my country is a party. Not only my country. I know that the United States has not joined the UN Convention, and they are not a party to it, which is it is no wonder, because if they join this UN Convention, they would must be held to account for international weapons smuggling and supplies to terrorists. But according to this international legislation and the Bulgarian legislation, we cannot export weapons without knowing the end use of these weapons. And we don't know them. According to the documents, it is just indicated the end user is the U.S. Special Operations Command and the U.S. government for their international allies. Who the international U.S. allies are and what for these weapons would be used, it is not indicated. It is gross violation of international law. I want also to explain that the scheme involved private American companies, because this is a practice which has often been used by the CIA to cover up its agents and to provide cover to its agents. We don't talk about private companies, which you mentioned, Purple Shovel, which are randomly selected. These private American companies were awarded millions of dollars, and I'm talking about at least $1 billion for 4 years to supply weapons to militant groups in Syria and in Iraq and also in other places around the world. Here we are talking about the involvement not only of the United States and the Pentagon and the CIA, we're talking about the involvement of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
Israel, I mean, the list can kind of go on. And, you know, kind of speak to the importance of Silkway Airlines in the utilization of the diplomatic status, because then none of that cargo can be checked under the diplomatic status, correct?
Absolutely. Here we're talking about the involvement of all states. We're not talking about the involvement of just criminal groups and private companies. Here we're talking about international scheme involving whole governments and whole states. The Azeri state-run company, Silkway Airlines, was chartered by the U.S. Special Operations Command and these private American companies to supply Eastern European weapons to different war zones around the world. The thing is, they used diplomatic status because the Azeri Ministry of Foreign Affairs sent a request for such diplomatic clearance for their flights to, for example, Bulgarian government or the Serbian, Croatian, Romanian government, etc. I also want to stress that these Eastern European weapons, they're Soviet-style weapons. They are non-US standard weapons, non-NATO standard weapons, and also they're not compatible neither with the military standard of the US Army nor with the military standard of the Saudi Army, meaning that these weapons would never be used by the Saudi or the American armies themselves. This is clear indication of the purpose and the aim of the weapon supplies, and sadly, all these governments were well aware where these weapons were going. First, because the end user was omitted from the documentation. Secondly, because all these documents that were leaked to me and that I also published, they're featured in my investigation, people can see them. They are also published online so that most of the journalists who are interested in this issue can investigate them and can inspect and can do their checks in their own countries, and they can put these questions to their own governments. But all these governments, according to the legislation, they must give an approval for the exports for the weapons exports. For example, in my country, this special commission, which allows and gives export licenses, it includes all possible ministers, plus the director, the head of the Bulgarian Secret Services, the Minister of Defense, Minister of Internal Affairs, the Minister of Economy. All of them signed and approved these exports. So,
and Azerbaijan has been notorious in as almost a apex and a focal point for Gladio B and the funneling of drugs and weapons. And not only to mention is the Azerbaijani government involved. I mean, you're talking about the Azerbaijani Chamber of Commerce, who's had former advisors and board of directors like Dick Cheney, Henry Kissinger, Brent Scowcroft, Richard Armitage, Richard Pearls, Zbigniew Brzezinski. I mean, these are individuals who are also a part of the American-Turkish Council. So, I mean, there are so many players involved in this that help facilitate this on such an insane level. It's really scary.
And this also destroys the narrative that, you know, the U.S. media was saying that the bases of Iraqi soldiers were overrun by ISIS militants and all the weapons and ammunition and everything was stolen, and that's how they got armed. Look, if you've got a military base with a bunch of people with heavy weapons and a bunch of crazy people come running at it to overrun it, and you're the one with all the heavy weapons, I'm thinking you're pretty safe. You're gonna win that fight. So
right.
It's garbage. It was a garbage narrative from the beginning, and you uncovering all of this, Dilyana, proves that.
Yes, it's totally fake news.
Yeah,
I will also use this term because it is fake. If these media outlets claim that the weapons were stolen by ISIS in Iraq, for example, from the Iraqi military bases, probably this could have happened in 1, 2, or 3 occasions, but how can they explain these weapons exports of non-US standard weapons not to the Iraqi army, but to military groups which the US government called moderate rebels? The US government never denied the weapon supplies for Syrian rebels. Just they call them moderate rebels.
Right.
But how can rebels be moderate when they are heavily armed and when they kill civilians? And I saw this myself. This happened before my eyes. I saw how these so-called moderate rebels, Al-Qaeda affiliates, Al-Nusra Front, they fired rockets. And one of these rockets fell next to me, and I saw myself how this rocket beheaded a mother and her child before my eyes.
Wow.
How can we talk about moderate rebels who killed civilians when they were supplied with 122 millimeter rockets? This is not for defense. 122 millimeter Grad rocket produced by a Bulgarian state-run company, military plant. They are not for defense. They are offensive, heavy weapons. And they were exported and smuggled on diplomatic flights provided by the state of Azerbaijan. So we are talking about the whole governments involved.
Government sanctioned, man. That's the scary part. Yeah.
Yeah, and when we talk about the diplomatic status used for these flights and the shipping, the ship, I forget the name of the ship that was used.
It was a Danish ship vessel.
Marianne Danica?
Marianne Danica. Yeah,
right. So
from Bulgaria to Arabia.
Yes. So the diplomatic status was used so that the contents of these shipments could not be inspected. And now moving forward into your latest investigation, which is in reading this, it's absolutely incredible. Diplomatic status is being used to protect these facilities too, right?
Yeah.
So, that's the thing is, what prompted you, and Jeff, if you want to break it down a little bit before she goes into it, and ask, and I'll ask you to follow up, what prompted you to start looking into this is the follow-up that I would want to know, initially after Jeff breaks it down.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's essentially what you have found is U.S. biological, for lack of a better term, biological weapons facilities over basically conservatively 23 different countries throughout Europe and Asia, technically Eurasia, and you've also...
And
I'm sorry?
And Africa.
Yeah, exactly. And the tests that are going on with animals and civilians, outbreaks that you're finding in the contamination of water. And then later on down the line, towards the end here, we're going to talk about how this all relates to some of these chemical attacks and the death of this Russian spy and his daughter, and the role Porter Down has. But talk about the facilities that you have found all throughout Eurasia, and the impact and what they're doing, and like Pat said, how they're being protected through diplomatic status.
If the first investigation into the Pentagon weapons supplies to jihadists in Syria, if it was it was terrifying. This one, it is, I don't know how to put it. It is dreadful. It is appalling. It is very important for us to talk about it, because while I was investigating the Pentagon weapons programs, I had no idea about this biological weapons program. Absolutely no idea. I found out accidentally that there was a program which was run by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. This is the Department of Defense agency, and it was worth $2 billion. So I started to check this program and to investigate the documents that, by the way, many of them are publicly available, and people can have a look and can familiarize themselves with what the U.S. government and what the Pentagon have been doing for the last decade. So while investigating this program, I found out that it included the establishment of military biolaboratories run by the Pentagon in 25 countries, at least 25 countries across the world. These military biolaboratories, they test man-made viruses, bacteria, and toxins. And interestingly, they are located in countries which border on the Pentagon main rivals, Russia, China, and Iran. Recently, the Pentagon chief announced that their main rivals are Russia, China, and Iran. And coincidentally, these military biolaboratories are located in countries bordering on or around Russia, China, and Iran. I want to explain. It is a bit complicated because we are not medical experts, but people must know the following. For example, I'm from Bulgaria. My genotype is different from your genotype because we live in different places and different continents. So, for example, I can contract a certain disease, but you will not contract the same disease or the same strain, or the same strain, let's say, of anthrax may affect you, but may not affect me in the same way because we have different genotypes. But my genotype, because I'm a Bulgarian, is very similar, let's say, to the Russian genotype, because Bulgaria borders on Black Sea, which borders on Russia. So it is just a few thousand miles that separates us. And that is why the Pentagon set up military biolaboratories around these countries. What they do, if you have a look at their projects, they isolate a local strain of a virus, let's say, or bacteria, let's say anthrax, and they start researching this virus. They start genetically modifying this virus so that they could have a possible biological weapon. Then they start infecting the local population, because since the start of the military program of the Pentagon in these 25 countries around the world, the number of deadly outbreaks in all those countries involved have increased dramatically. And we are talking about diseases like Ebola, anthrax, tularemia, all bioagents classified as bioterrorism agents.
And we don't hear any of that over here. I don't think I've heard about any outbreaks. I don't know about you, Pat, but that's crazy. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, the extreme flu that everybody got this year, who knows, right? America suffered a severe flu outbreak this year that was more serious this year than many others. So it's, I don't know.
Dilyana, were you saying that, I mean, just the nature of, I mean, obviously we're not, whatever the word is, you know, biologist, or are you saying they are creating genetic specific bioweapons?
I can ask this question. It's very suspicious because there are projects involving collection of biological material, DNA, from specifically Russians and Chinese. I don't know why they're doing this, and the only possible explanation is probably this one, that they're researching possible ethnic bioweapons. So far, nobody has officially confirmed the research and development of such ethnic weapons. There is no such official confirmation, but in some of the documents that I read concerning this military program, it is written that ethnic bioweapons are a huge threat, meaning that somebody has researched them. It is confirmed in the documents.
Well, you know, this is interesting because I've had this conversation with people. I don't know if you guys have, it's a website, it's a company called, I think it's called 23andMe, where you send in basically your blood and they tell you your ethnic breakdown. But for me, that's like giving them, you know, what they need to make us, you know, ethnic specific or genetic specific bioweapon. So I don't know, ladies and gentlemen, be careful with your 23andMe and your full disclosure of your genetics and your DNA.
Also, another confirmation of this military program, the Pentagon does not deny the existence of such military program. And they have also published on their websites a lot of photos, programs, full list of biological agents and chemicals that they have been researching and producing. In the first place, they produce them themselves. They not isolate them from somewhere. They themselves produce these live bioagents.
Right.
And then this happens at one military facility called the Guay Proving Ground at the state of Utah. Then, after producing these bioagents, they test them for dissemination by powder, aerosol, liquid, and by explosives. Can somebody answer me? Because I tried to ask them, I didn't get an answer. Why and what defensive is there in the fact that the Pentagon has been testing the dissemination of biological agents by explosives? Where is the defense in this case?
Right.
To produce and test bioagents for dissemination by explosives. It is very, very...
Seems rather offensive to me.
Yeah, now, you know, we can talk back about, because I'm curious, when you see the outbreaks around the world that have gone on, just in Sierra Leone, Western Africa, with the outbreak in, I think it was 2014, the Sierra Leone government scientists were really accusing a company called Metabiotic Inc. of very dangerous experiments with the Ebola and culturing red blood cells and a lot of other stuff that was going on. And then Yemen, there's over 1 million cases of cholera. You know, is what would you say are the odds of these diseases, these outbreaks being caused by these labs as testing on human beings in poor countries?
It is worth noting that this American company, private American company, Metabiotic, is also a Pentagon contractor, working under different Pentagon programs involving these military biolaboratories in Georgia and in Ukraine as well, and in Sierra Leone. Right. This company, Metabiotic, was awarded, as far as I remember, $17 million by the Pentagon, by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, to do work for the Pentagon before the start of the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone in 2012. So yeah, they
before and during, right?
$17 million. This is the contract in full, but for Sierra Leone the sum was about, I think, 3 million.
Okay.
As fast as I remember. I need to look at the documents from the U.S. Federal Contracts Registry, but they were sent to work there and commissioned by the Pentagon in 2012. The Ebola outbreak was 2 years later, in 2014. So what did they do there 2 years earlier? Performing work for the Pentagon? This is a very legitimate question. And this company, Metabiotic, also operates one of the military biolaboratories of the Pentagon in Georgia. It is called the Luga Center, and in Ukraine as well. In Ukraine, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency has funded 11 biolaboratories. Can you imagine that the Pentagon has been operating 11 military biolaboratories in Ukraine? And what is even more scary and very suspicious is that under the contract and the military agreement between Ukraine and the United States, the Ukrainian government is prohibited from public disclosure of any information concerning the Pentagon military biological agents research.
Isn't that the protocol for all the host countries? They can't ask. There's no oversight for what's going on.
Absolutely, there is no control by the host state over the activities of the American biowarfare scientists inside
because of diplomatic status, right?
Because yet again they have and they operate under diplomatic status.
Wow.
Why is it needed for them? I'm talking not only about military personnel, about civilian personnel. Why is it needed for them? These are scientists. Why do they need diplomatic status without being diplomats? It is so simple, because you have private companies, private Pentagon contractors who are granted diplomatic status. And also they have diplomatic vehicles, meaning that they can transport something. Why do scientists need diplomatic vehicles? I just can't understand if everything is so transparent and so clear. I also put this question to the U.S. Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Health, Robert Kadlec, a few weeks ago during a seminar on the threat of biological weapons. It was held on the 7th of March in Brussels. It was held and organized by the European Parliament, and they invited him to give them a lecture of the American experience. So I decided to ask my questions, and his answer was, quote, "The United States does not have such a military biological weapons program, and all these military biolaboratories are openly available to anybody who wants to look at them."
Wow.
So he flatly lied about these biolaboratories. First, if you have a look at the documents, these projects are classified, and if they were so open to anybody, why one of the requirements for work at these military biolaboratories is the need of the employees to be, first, American citizens, only American citizens. Secondly, to have been granted security clearance. Down in the document, it is explained why. Because these scientists, who must be only American citizens with security clearance, they will need access to classified zones and classified information. So it says it all. And this is another proof how the US officials just flatly denied everything. And this happened in the European Parliament. And they don't care what we'll all think about that. They used us. I mean, first I want to differentiate between the US government and the US people, because my guess is that the US people are kept
completely in the dark.
In the dark, and they don't know about that, because this is the US taxpayer money, and the American people must know how the Pentagon spend their money. Because can you imagine, instead of spending this $2 billion on the health of the American people. They spent the American taxpayer money on, let's say, the health of foreign countries. It is not the health of the foreign countries' population. It is a military biological weapons program. And I'm not sure that the American people would want that.
Well, we're hearing in the news lately, you know, as it relates to the Russian spy who recently died. I just want to read just a little paragraph from an article which you just wrote just recently. The Pentagon has spent at least $70 million on military experiments involving tests with deadly viruses and chemical agents at Portadown, the UK military laboratory near the city of Salisbury. The secretive biological and chemical research facility is located just 13 kilometers from where on March 4th of March, former Russian spy Sergei Skripal, I'm massacring his name, I'm sure, and his daughter Yulia were found slumped on a bench following an alleged Novichok nerve agent poisoning. So talk to me about that, man. The Russian spy apparently was somehow involved in this Portadown stuff. I know he had animals at his home that were being tested on. What's the role of Portadown and this Russian spy with all of this?
I was shocked. First, when I read about this news, it was probably the 4th or 5th of March. I was very curious because it somehow reminded me of all these programs, all these projects. It was very strange, something like this to happen in a civilian area in the United Kingdom. And I already knew that the Pentagon had some projects in the United Kingdom, but I didn't expect that something like this can happen, especially in the UK, because this is their so-called foreign ally, according to the documents concerning this military program. So I checked what is publicly available, and according to the U.S. Federal Contracts Registry, the Pentagon has spent this huge amount of money on tests on deadly viruses, bacteria, toxins, nerve agents at Portadown. This ex-Russian spy had guinea pigs in his home, and the same guinea pigs were used by Portadown scientists to test nerve agents on them under the Pentagon programs. It's a strange coincidence given the fact that Portadown is located just 13 kilometers from the place or from the site where on the 4th of March Sergei Skripal and his daughter were found unconscious following an alleged nerve agent attack. There are many questions, because if an impartial investigation was to be carried out by the UK government, the first line of the investigation must be Portadown. This is a military, biological, and chemical research facility located just 13 kilometers away. But nobody in his investigating Portadown, nobody is talking about these military programs running in this facility for years, if not for decades.
It was blamed on Russia, of course.
It was blamed on the Russian government. And some of the reports that I had heard when looking into it was that this particular Russian spy was potentially going to out MI6 for the release and assistance in the false dossier against Donald Trump. That I don't know. I haven't confirmed, but I was reading some of that.
For sure, he has links with this former MI6 agents. One of them is Pablo Miller. This is the MI6 officer who recruited them in the beginning of in 1990s, and that is why he was later jailed and served a few years in a Russian prison. So the very same agent, MI6 or former MI6 agent, Pablo Miller, lived also in Salisbury. how come? It is such a strange coincidence. And this information that Pablo Miller lived in Salisbury, it was included in his profile on LinkedIn. But later on, when it was disclosed that he also lived in Salisbury, he removed his profile from LinkedIn. But people, luckily, saved this information, and you can see online screenshots of his profile on LinkedIn. And in this if you have a look at the screenshots, you will see that he mentioned his work for the company of the author of the infamous Russian dossier.
Steele, yeah.
Yes. So he worked for him, and obviously in the same city where Sergei Skripal also lived, probably Sergei Skripal also worked for them, and they are all connected. And you have former MI6 officers, spies, involved in two huge cases in the last 2 years. The first one was the dossier allegedly linking Trump with Russia, which turned out to be very fake, according to Trump. They couldn't find any proof of all the claims made in this dossier. And the second case now with the same people, again against Russia. It is such a coincidence.
Right.
Well, looking at the larger chessboard, the grand chessboard, as we talk, you're right, babe. I'm going to ask you to speculate a little bit, Dilyana, because I've heard you kind of speculate a little bit. You know, there is clearly a NATO, and it has been going on for a long time, a NATO kind of encirclement of Russia. And like you said, there is no accident that these bio facilities are kind of encircling, some of the enemies, Iran. Is this a beta test for something bigger? I heard you kind of allude to in some of your reports that you think possibly this could be a beta test for some kind of larger, not necessarily a war, but just a larger event down the line. What's your speculation as to what all of this could culminate to?
In my opinion, now they just test what they can use probably in the future. But look, Russia and the Russian president announced that they have new nuclear missiles. They wanted the world to know. I think, in my opinion, the Americans, the Pentagon has also published publicly some of these documents because they want Russia or the world to know what they have. And
they're showing their teeth. They're showing their teeth.
I have no other, I have no other explanation as to why they published these military reports, why they are not classified. Yes, there are many classified reports, but there is a leakage of information in the public domain, which is very suspicious. I think they just want to show, to flex muscles, and to show to Russia, look what we have. And be very careful, because we can do something very harmful to you. This is my speculation. Otherwise, I have no other explanation.
Yeah,
they just want the world to know, because for the official agenda, they say, yes, we have it, but this is for our defense. Defense from what? You are on they are on the border of Russia. What defense? They are on the border of Russia, not Russia on their borders. Meaning that this is not. I mean, whoever must know knows that, and this is how things work in geopolitics.
A little bit of saber rattling
for Americans. For Americans to understand, it would be like if Russian troops were on the Canadian-American border and the Mexican-American border, there would be all hell breaking loose, and basically American politicians and the president would say, those troops leave or we're going to annihilate everything. Right. It's scorched earth, and that's the way it's going to be. So I can understand how the Russian politicians and Putin must feel right now. And it is scary when you think about having genetically specific biological weapons that are designed to kill a massive number of human beings in China and Russia. That's some pretty serious stuff.
It's very important for people to know that biological weapons, if used under optimal conditions, have greater killing capacity than nuclear weapons. They can cause more deaths, more casualties, and definitely more lethal. So it is threat for the whole of the humanity. It is not only against Russia, China, and Africa. It is against all of us. And people must start asking questions to their local governments to hold them to account. For example, in Georgia, the reaction of the Georgian authorities after I published this investigation was to delete all data regarding the Pentagon program. This data was published on a server of their Center for Disease Control. What they did was just to delete this data, but I luckily saved everything. So there is a proof of everything that I'm saying now. It is not just empty words. These are the facts, and this is the truth. So the Georgian government has what to hide, not from me, but from its own people, because the Georgian people were used and are being used as a testing ground for viruses, bacteria, and toxins. Under the American legislation, this so-called type of research, dual use of research, or the modification of viruses, bacteria, and toxins, and creating of genetically modified pathogens in order to enhance their lethality. It is legal. There was a ban by Obama a few weeks ago, a temporary ban, and it was lifted in 2017. So now it is perfectly legal for US scientists to create viruses, but not only to create them more lethal and more deadly.
Weaponized.
How insane is this world we're living in? I mean, we're living in where our NDAA here in our country makes it legal and allowable for the government to engage in propaganda against its citizenry. We have what's going on over there in, different parts of the world where they could do biomedical facilities or bioweapon facilities with no oversight. Absolutely insane, this world we're living in. What some of the ramifications from your original breaking of the story of NATO involvement in the Azerbaijani shipping weapons, et cetera, and Silkway, you got fired from your job. You were interrogated by the Bulgarian secret police. Has there any other ramifications since you keep bringing, you keep dropping some pretty serious truth bombs? Have you had any other, threats or anything?
God.
I understand your question. I can tell you 6 months later, the Bulgarian government resumed the weapon supplies to the Pentagon, which are aimed at arming rebels in Syria again. So the result was zero.
Business as usual.
I'm saying this with the great sorrow that nothing changed. Nothing changed. It is the same old. And you are shocked that your government is doing this. What should I say? What about my government or my country? I don't feel that I live in a sovereign state. No, I live in a totally dependent state without being able to say no. We will not arm terrorists. That's the sad reality.
Right, and the troubling fact of, to even here in America, Dilyana, to convince people of what's going on is so hard, because as the old saying goes, it's easier to fool someone than to show them that they've been fooled. And it's so frustrating for Jeffrey and I. Obviously, we've got a massive following of people who are waking up, but the vast majority of Americans simply don't understand any of this stuff and they can't absorb it mentally. On a mental level, they just simply can't absorb the truth, and it's very troubling.
I have the same feeling and the same problem in my country. People either don't care or they're kept in dark, and we don't have independent media here. At least you have and journalists like you. While in my country, no, we are such a small country. We don't have alternative media. We don't have independent journalists. So people don't have access to original source of information, and they are brainwashed.
Yeah, they like the people on the other side, whether they just can't be convinced of the truth, or they're paid propagandists who will try to online make you sound like you're crazy or we're crazy, things like that. We have to see past all of that and understand and just keep speaking the truth and get more and more people to understand it.
I'm sure that in the end, the truth will come out. It can't be hidden. Sooner or later, people will know the truth. And sadly, such tragic incidents are the eye-opener. For example, the war in Syria. Now, after 7 years into this war, people know who supplied the weapons to terrorists and who is continuing to supply weapons to terrorists. A month ago, there was, for me, a breaking news, but not for the Western media. I think 40 tons of chemical weapons were found in makeshift chemical laboratory, which was used by ISIS in Syria. 40 tons of chemicals. 40 tons.
Whoa, and yeah, we never heard this. Never heard that.
It was not in the news. I saw the original footage, which was taken by local journalists in Syria, but I never saw this footage and this news featured in the bulletins of the.
Well, then, because that would mess up the narrative that Bashar al-Assad is using chemical weapons on his own people. I mean, even Mad Dog Mattis, our defense secretary, said that was a false narrative and wasn't accurate. Wow. Yeah. I'm blown away. I really am. I mean, even if the truth comes out, Dilyana, and I'm not going to stop, and I know you're not going to stop, and Pat's not going to stop. It just, I say it all the time. We live in a society over here in the West where we trample each other for new iPhones and Black Friday sales, etc. So it's like our priorities are so, pardon my language, so fucked up that this kind of stuff can actually just take place right in front of us, and nobody seems to care.
Yes, you're absolutely right. To be honest, some personal information from me. I used to work as correspondent for the Bulgarian media, but before that, I covered domestic news. So my focus was on internal affairs. I never paid that attention to international news, but once you see yourself what's going on outside your country, and once you see the reality, the war, the real face of the tragedy, you realize that if you complain, for example, in my country, people are very poor, we're the poorest state of the European Union, you realize what misery and what tragedy means. Once you see yourself, the real tragedy around the world, once you see what you must investigate. Because what I must investigate, not only I, all the journalists in general, they must investigate the real crimes happening in our world now. And they must help stop these real crimes. For example, who the American president slept with a decade ago, I don't care.
Right.
Probably the American people care. I don't care. The Syrian people don't care. Dying children from cholera and from rockets in Yemen don't care. We don't care about the personal life and sexual experience of the American president. We do care about these wars stop, because nobody is profiting from these wars except for the huge military-industrial complex of the United States. This is the sad truth, and the Bulgarian military-industrial complex, and the Serbian military-industrial complex.
And NATO, the EU, I mean, all of these different governing bodies that are basically, for lack of a better term, profiting from the misery of many.
But while the mainstream media is spreading this breaking news about the love of one politician or another, or the sexual intercourse of him and her, people will not pay attention to the real news. And it is not about sexual experience of him, her, or everybody is a human being. I mean, everybody has his personal or her personal life. I don't care about that. I care about the real
crimes against humanity.
Exactly, crimes against humanity. I mean, great, perfectly said, Pat. I mean, that's essentially what it is. I mean, it goes beyond any nationality or ethnicity. I mean, this is you know, the old phrase, "No one is free if others are oppressed," and it's just like what's happening right now throughout the world. It's so heartbreaking, and I can't, you know, speaking for Pat, you can echo my sentiments. I can't thank you enough, Dilyana, for the work you do, for putting yourself in the position. I mean, it's not a safe gig doing what you're doing, and you know, the truth, like you said, has to come out. Woman. A very, very brave woman, and I truly, truly cannot thank you enough for the work you do.
No, I am the one to thank you, and yet again, for me, it means a lot, and this opportunity to be able to speak up. And we are on different continents, and we share the same values and the same news. It is just amazing. I'm happy that I know you and that I can talk with you and your viewers. Thank you so much.
Well, I mean, truth, love, humanity, compassion. That is something that transcends all of this, and that's in my opinion the tie that binds. And hopefully we can get more back to that. Sorry, Pat, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Dilyana, you should try and make it to the United States and get a working visa so that you can work for one of the alternative news sites here and be able to spread the news a little bit even bigger.
Yeah, we would love to have our Bulgarian the Conspiracy Farm correspondent, let me tell you.
Rely on that. I prefer to stay a war correspondent. So the United States, I wish it for you. You will never have wars there inside your country. I wish it for you.
Hey, shout out any social media. Where can we track you down? Where can we find out, you know, latest work and what you're up to?
I didn't hear very well your question, but
a social media link, any Twitter pages, website, anything you can shout out.
People can read news on Facebook or Twitter with the links that I publish on my page, but it is hard to spell it because my surname is so difficult.
No, I will provide the link, the Twitter link to this video here. Don't worry about it. I appreciate it.
My surname is a nightmare for everybody, even for people in Bulgaria. So I'm just Dilyana for them.
Right. Dilyana Gaytandsheiva has been our guest today. Yeah, well, we've said it quite a few times on our show. We definitely are a big fan of yours. And again, thank you so very much for the generosity with your time and all of the work you do. Stay safe and seriously, keep kicking ass, man. Keep doing it.
Thank you once again, and it's been my honor and pleasure to be with you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Dilyana Gaytandsheiva. Peace and so much love. Stay tuned, everybody. There will be more.